I think so. It was quite a good race, even though I think the first two stints we were struggling quite a bit on the tires. So we were doing quite an aggressive strategy. But luckily on that final stint, we managed to hang in there. And actually the pace was a bit better on a bit lower fuel load. So that was good. I think we drove an attacking/defending race. So attacking with a strategy, defending, of course, with the cars behind. But it worked out for us. And I think that was the maximum possible for us today.
On a day like today, do you still think about the championship though? Because it's good points you made up on some on Piastri and a lot on Lando, obviously.
It's a long season, you know, so you need to go race by race, and we'll always do the best we can.
Looking forward to your Red Bull home race with all your fans in Austria?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always a great weekend there. We've had a lot of great results, and hopefully we can have another strong weekend there.
Did you know that Max Verstappen was on the verge of a point suspension just before his most controversial race? And what happened with George Russell under the safety car could change the entire season. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Russell did it on purpose to provoke him? What's behind Red Bull's drop in performance and the growing tension between the top drivers? In this video, I explain what happened in Canada with Verstappen, the RB21's technical issues, and the psychological war with Russell that is already escalating. Max Verstappen arrived at the Canadian Grand Prix with a buildup of pressure not seen for a long time. He was no longer simply the undisputed favorite, nor the driver who could win with one hand. The landscape had changed, and what many believed would be just another race to strengthen their championship became a test of emotional, technical, and strategic endurance. From the start of the weekend in Montreal, the signs were clear. Red Bull was not comfortable. The RB21, which had shown weaknesses on previous circuits, once again showed serious problems. According to Verstappen himself, the car was not responding well during the first few sessions, and the team had to change its strategy on the fly to stay competitive. He said it bluntly, "We struggled a lot with the tires." Unlike other seasons, where even in difficult times Red Bull found a way to dominate, in Canada they found themselves trapped in a situation where second place was the best they could have achieved. And I'm not saying this, Max said it. This result was the best we could have hoped for. Behind that phrase lies more than a technical analysis. There's an acceptance that things have changed, and that Red Bull's dominance is no longer unquestionable. But what was most striking wasn't just the final result, but the way it was achieved. Red Bull was forced to use a more aggressive strategy than expected. The technical aspect mingled with the psychological. And amidst that tension, Verstappen showed a more human, more vulnerable version. He didn't lose his composure in the race, but his body language, his statements, and his tactical approach made it clear that something is weighing more heavily than usual in his surroundings. This second place isn't just a statistic in the championship standings. It's a warning sign. Red Bull, for the first time in a long time, doesn't have all the answers. And Verstappen, although still one of the strongest drivers on the grid, is facing a season with real obstacles in and out of the car. Max Verstappen's second-place finish in Canada didn't just make headlines for his on-track performance. What really raised alarm bells was everything that happened off the road. And there, rumors, gestures, and above all, words played a role as important as the tires. The tension began even before the race. In the post-qualifying press conference, Verstappen's patience reached breaking point. Journalists insisted on asking him about the 11 penalty points he has accumulated on his license. Remember, with 12, he would automatically receive a one-race suspension. It's a critical situation, and when you're on the verge of something so serious, it's not surprising that the pressure starts to feel unbearable. Max responded sharply. He seemed upset and tense, and his words made it very clear. "I don't need to hear it again. It's really pissing me off." It was a direct, unfiltered reaction that we didn't see coming. But it said much more than it seemed. He wasn't just fed up with the question. It was revealing that the pressure was getting to him. And that's where things got even more complicated. Sitting next to him, George Russell chimed in with what sounded like a light-hearted joke. "I've got a few more points on my playing license." But the context changed everything. Russell knew what he was saying, and he knew who he was saying it to. At that moment, the entire room understood that this wasn't an innocent comment. It was a barb, measured and direct. Verstappen's expression confirmed it. His physical reaction was immediate. No response was necessary. His nonverbal language said it all. The fixed gaze, The change in his posture, the tense silence. Russell had struck a chord, and Max wasn't about to hide it. The specialized media were quick to interpret what had happened. They saw it as the beginning of psychological warfare, a strategic move by Russell, provoking his rival at just the right moment, reminding him, subtly, that he's one step away from being sidelined due to a penalty, and doing it in front of everyone. A way to emotionally undermine him before sharing the front row of the starting lineup. The tension didn't stay in that press room. It moved to the paddock, was felt in the stands, and seeped into every pre-race analysis. Because it wasn't just a fight for position anymore. It was a mental test, a challenge that went beyond the stopwatch, and one that faced Verstappen with a dilemma: stay cool or react. And this is where the rumors gained traction. Some began to suggest that Verstappen's entourage was no longer as aligned as before, that there was concern within Red Bull, not just about the car's performance, but about the emotional impact all this pressure could have on their star driver. There was even speculation that the relationship between Max and certain team members could have become strained due to strategic differences. Nothing confirmed, but the mere fact that these rumors are circulating is an indication that the atmosphere isn't the same as before. And while all this was brewing outside the car, another, even more explosive chapter was brewing on the track. Because if the press conference already seemed like too much, what happened under the safety car left everyone in a state of shock. Beyond the media tension and psychological pressure, what truly worries Red Bull is something that goes far beyond the emotional: the car. The RB21, the car that until recently seemed an extension of Verstappen's talent, is no longer the invincible weapon it was in previous seasons. Canada was the clearest confirmation that the team is going through a real technical crisis. And the most alarming thing is that this crisis doesn't seem to have an immediate solution. Throughout the weekend in Montreal, the RB21's behavior was erratic, unpredictable, and at times, simply ineffective. Verstappen himself said it bluntly. He admitted that they had many problems with the tires in the first two stints. And while his style has always been direct, this time a different tone was noticeable. It wasn't simply a one-off criticism. It was an acceptance of a structural weakness. Red Bull tried to compensate with strategy what it couldn't achieve with pure performance. They changed tactics mid-race, adopting a more aggressive approach to try to salvage points. And it worked, but with limitations. Because the truth is, even with near-perfect execution from the pit wall, the car simply wasn't up to scratch. Verstappen made it clear they managed to improve the pace in the final stint, but it was an emergency fix, not a real evolution. The subsequent technical analysis confirmed what many engineers had suspected since previous races. The RB21 suffers from chronic balance issues, poor tire management, and structural rigidity that makes it difficult to handle on circuits with aggressive curbs like Montreal. These problems aren't new, but now they've become impossible to hide. Helmut Marko, always forthright, acknowledged this publicly. He said they can match their rivals' pace for 6 or 8 laps, but then degradation hits them first. It's a statement that doesn't just acknowledge the flaw. It also suggests they don't have the current tools to correct it quickly. And in such a tight season, that's a huge threat. To understand the problem, you have to look beyond the numbers. Red Bull arrived in Canada without announcing any major aerodynamic updates. Unlike McLaren or Mercedes, which brought visible improvements to their suspension and floor, Red Bull opted to maintain its previous setup. It was a conservative decision, which many interpreted as a sign that they didn't want to take too many risks. But it could also be interpreted as something else. They're not clear on where to evolve. Technical rumors pointed to a possible modification to the front wing and minor tweaks to the underbody of the car. There was even speculation about a subtle redesign of the diffuser. But none of this materialized publicly. And that fueled a bigger question. Is Red Bull stalling in its development? Or are they simply hiding their cards while they try to understand what isn't working? The worrying thing is that, at the same time, their rivals are making progress. McLaren has ceased to be a surprise and has become a constant threat. Mercedes, although still inconsistent, showed a clear leap in performance in Canada. Meanwhile, Red Bull seems to be putting out fires rather than developing long-term solutions. Chief Engineer Paul Monahan spoke a few weeks ago about some of the changes introduced in Japan. Technical modifications to the engine output, adjustments to the lower suspension. But all of that, in theory, wasn't enough. Because in Montreal, those problems persisted. The car was still difficult to balance, and the mixed sections of a circuit highlighted the fragility of the chassis. And the worst thing isn't that the car is in crisis. The worst thing is that there's no clear solution in the short term. The problems Red Bull faces aren't strategic, they're structural, and solving them requires time, in-depth analysis, and clear direction. None of those things seem completely aligned at the moment. This unstable technical landscape doesn't just affect results. It also affects the team's confidence. It affects Verstappen, who can no longer blindly rely on his tool. It affects the strategists, who have to improvise solutions race by race. And it affects, above all, the team's position in the championship, where every point now feels like a battle. And when you have a car that isn't performing as it used to, a driver under disciplinary pressure, and rivals who have already smelled blood, the situation can escalate very quickly. But the most explosive part of the weekend is yet to come. What happened under the safety car? What turned a simple maneuver into a formal complaint? A move that, according to Red Bull, was a calculated attempt to bring down Verstappen. If there was a moment that marked a turning point in the Canadian Grand Prix, it was undoubtedly what happened under the safety car in the final laps. What at first seemed like just another caution ended up becoming the center of a storm. And at the heart of the conflict, once again, were Max Verstappen and George Russell. It all started with a maneuver that, at first glance, shouldn't have generated so much controversy. George Russell, the leader at the time, abruptly reduced his speed on the back straight. A strange action, considering the safety car hadn't yet left the track, and drivers usually maintain a constant pace to avoid incidents. Verstappen, surprised by such an aggressive deceleration, reacted immediately. He momentarily overtook him. And that's when all the alarm bells went off. Because although the maneuver was reversed almost instantly, the question remained, had he overtaken in prohibited conditions? Radio communications were immediate. Verstappen, visibly annoyed, reported. George suddenly braked very aggressively. The voice of his engineer, Giampiero Lambiase, was quick to respond, with a warning that said much more than it seemed. Don't fall for these games, okay? That phrase changes everything. Because it wasn't just referring to a maneuver. It was referring to an intention, a strategy, a measured provocation. George Russell, for his part, didn't stay silent. He launched his own version. Verstappen overtook me under the safety car. And with that, the narrative changed. What seemed like a simple incident turned into a real-time exchange of accusations. A situation that forced the stewards to review images, telemetry, and statements to determine if an infringement had occurred. But the most interesting thing came next. In the paddock, after the race, Christian Horner didn't hide his annoyance. He got straight to the point. He said Russell was obviously looking in the rearview mirror for Max, and that the maneuver had a clear objective, to provoke him, to force an error, to seek that penalty point that would keep him out of the next Grand Prix. Television footage reinforced that theory. Russell could be seen turning his head toward his right mirror just before braking. Not once, but several times. Race analysts were quick to join the discussion. Some considered it a dirty move, others, a legal but questionable tactic. But they all agreed on one thing. Russell knew exactly what he was doing. The situation quickly escalated. Red Bull lodged a formal protest against Russell. They alleged that his conduct was unsportsmanlike, that he had deliberately sought a reaction from Verstappen, that it wasn't a simple miscalculation. It was a provocation disguised as a maneuver. Although the FIA ultimately dismissed the protest, the damage had already been done. The episode was recorded not only in the Grand Prix records, but in the minds of fans, teams, and the drivers themselves. Because, beyond the official ruling, what was clear is that the rivalry between Verstappen and Russell has reached a new level. What we saw in Canada wasn't just a battle on the track. It was a psychological war, a high-speed chess game, where every maneuver has implications far beyond the immediate outcome. And this time, that game nearly cost Verstappen dearly. The impact of this episode is profound. Because now, every time Verstappen gets close to Russell, the memory of what happened in Montreal will be fresh in his mind. Every braking, every maneuver, every gesture will be scrutinized. And that creates a constant tension that cannot be underestimated. Furthermore, these types of situations are draining. Mentally, Strategically, they force the driver to think beyond driving. They have to assess whether their rival is competing or provoking, whether the error is possible or it's being induced. And that, for someone already on the verge of a suspension, is a dangerous game. Red Bull knows this, and that's why their reaction was so strong. Because it wasn't just about defending their driver. It was about setting a limit, sending a message, making it clear that if the psychological game is going to continue, they too are willing to play it with every tool they have. The pressure didn't just come from the track. It came from the microphones, from the rearview mirrors, from every corner of the paddock. And it was felt, because when Max explodes in a press conference, when the team files a formal protest for braking under the safety car, and when the race engineer has to remind him not to fall for provocations, this isn't a normal situation. We're seeing a team feeling the weight of the most complex season they've faced in years. Technically, Red Bull is vulnerable. The RB21's problems aren't circumstantial. They aren't solved with a tire change or a well-executed strategy. They're issues of chassis, balance, and structural degradation. And that takes time, development, iteration. But the championship doesn't wait. Every Grand Prix is another blow if you don't come up with clear solutions. Emotionally, Verstappen is at his limit. His 11 penalty points are like a countdown. One more and he's out of the race. It doesn't matter if it's his fault or a maneuver induced by someone else. He's on the brink, and he knows it. That burden changes the way a driver faces every corner, every duel, every pit lane exit. Because it's no longer just about being fast. It's about surviving every Sunday. And if that weren't enough, Russell emerged as a new player in this war. Not just as a sporting rival, but as a destabilizing factor. His attitude, his words, his way of playing with the limits, turned him into something more than an opponent. He became a key player in the tension surrounding Verstappen today. And that's not going away. On the contrary, this is just beginning. So yes, what seemed like a simple second-place result turned into a silent earthquake that threatens to shatter many certainties. Red Bull stability, Verstappen's serenity, the clarity of the championship. None of that is guaranteed at this point. Everything that happened in Canada leaves us with one clear question. It's not whether Verstappen can win more races. What really matters now is whether he can maintain control this season. Of his surroundings, of his mind, and of that car that, for the first time, doesn't seem to respond as it used to. And that's what makes all this so fascinating. Because we're not just talking about racing. We're talking about strategies, of provocations, of resilience, and above all of survival. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Verstappen can withstand this pressure, or are we seeing the beginning of the end of his era at Red Bull? Was he provoked, or did he allow himself to be provoked?